Josh here, this is Treksplained. I apologize for the big gap in videos. A lot of stuff has happened over the past few months. My dad died, my cat died, my fiancée Amber was beaten up by cops, I had an exertion headache that lasted over a month, and all sorts of other things. But now I'm back, and where better to start over from than the beginning. Today's episode is the original pilot of Star Trek as a whole, The Cage. This is with the first Captain Pike. No Kirk here, although they did reuse this footage in a different episode later on called The Menagerie. Today isn't about that, this is just about The Cage. We start off with the first ever Star Trek Starfield. Ooh, pretty. Hey, it's some sort of spaceship. As someone who doesn't know anything about Star Trek, I can only assume that's the Millennium Falcon. Of course, it's the Enterprise in the familiar flyby and some old school Star Trek credits. Starring Jeffrey Hunter. Who's that? There will be a lot of people we don't know yet in this, but Jeffrey Hunter is the big one. He's Captain Pike, the main dude in this one episode. Something kinda cool but kinda cheesy now is the zoom in. They have done something similar in other episodes, but this was the very first one. They zoom in on the Enterprise bridge from the exterior until we see our characters all there at their stations on the interior. Seems like the crew knows something is out there, but they can't really see it. It keeps messing with the view screen and appears to be on a collision course. Oh no! But what does it turn out to be? Radio waves. Shit, man, you had me all worked up for nothing. A ship, the SS Columbia, had sent out a distress call about 18 years ago and crashed onto Talos 4, a planet with a breathable atmosphere. Captain Pike decides not to investigate and continue on to Vega Colony, their original destination. Spock seems shocked by this, but doesn't speak up. Captain Pike leaves the bridge and heads to his quarters. Once there, he calls for Dr. Boyce to stop by his quarters. The doctor arrives and starts fiddling in his case while Pike explains the situation a bit. The doctor hands him a martini and says sometimes a person will tell his bartender more than he'll tell his doctor. They argue about an off-screen fight on Rigel 7. Pike's been thinking about resigning because he doesn't want lives in his hands anymore. The doc thinks he should take a rest leave, but to retire would be too much. Spock calls over the intercom and announces that there are survivors. On the bridge, the analysis says there were multiple survivors. Pike decides to have the ship head to Talos after all. After some unimportant and sexist dialogue, they arrive at Talos 4. They analyze the planet and it's an A-OK to beam down. Once they're on the surface, they begin looking around and find a blue leaf plant that's actually humming. Well, that's interesting. They continue on and eventually find the crash survivors, who greet them quite warmly. They begin talking about science stuff, but then a young woman appears and they're frozen by her beauty. Her name is Vina. She was barely born when the ship crashed and is now a woman. Pike smirks like, "Hey baby." Unbeknownst to them, but knownst to us, they are being observed by the native Talosians. 3 of them are viewing them on a monitor inside a cave system. Talosians are shorter than normal humans, but have large bald heads and they can project imagery into a person's mind, basically having them see whatever the Talosians want them to see. The crew won't know that for a while yet, but we do. Their survivors begin packing up their things, while Vina follows Captain Pike and calls him a prime specimen. Pay no attention to that phrasing. She's just been around scientists her whole life. Ha ha ha, what a silly one. They talk about a secret they need to show the captain, and Vina leads him away. She points to things that are not there at all. Don't you see it? Pike doesn't understand what he's supposed to be looking at. She then disappears, as do the other crash survivors and their equipment. A door opens in the stone behind Captain Pike, and 2 Talosians come out of a cave and spray an orange powder on him. The landing party run after the captain, but the Talosians have already dragged him inside the cave and shut the door. They try to blast the door open, but only succeed in blasting away the outside stone. The solid metal door underneath remains firm. Spark reports it all to the Enterprise. Captain Pike wakes up in a cage of sorts. Name of the episode. He tries to break through the glass, but is unable to. Several Telosians arrive and talk to Pike through telepathy. They talk about Pike to each other in the third person. Not directly to Pike yet. Just commenting on him. They talk about beginning the experiment. Ah shit, what experiment? On the Enterprise, everyone is talking about how the inhabitants can read minds and create illusions. But what can they do about it? The Telosians' minds are so advanced, they could likely just swat any sort of assault away. Number 1, who is the lieutenant in charge while Pike is gone, says they're going to try blasting through the metal with a heavier cannon from the Enterprise. The Telosians are analyzing Pike in captivity and suggest starting with a recent life event in which he was forced to protect himself. Could this be Rigel 7, which was mentioned earlier? Pike is suddenly on a planet with a coastal palace and a purplish sky. Vina shows up, but she's not in rags anymore. She's in a flowing gown. She tells him to come along into the palace with him. There could be weapons or food. He points out that this is Rigel 7, and he's got a bad feeling about this. A roaring is heard, and Vina tries to drag Pike to the palace. He says it's starting just like it did 2 weeks ago, except for Vina, but he follows her into the palace anyway. Outside, with an anonymous roaring, or inside with a pretty girl. Which would you choose? They hide together in the palace, but a warrior in furs enters and starts searching. Vina thinks Pike should attack the warrior when it's not looking, but he argues that this is just a dream of some kind, an illusion. The warrior spots them, and Pike pushes Vina away while picking up a mace that was on the ground. He successfully knocks the warrior down, but if you watch the fight, you know it wasn't through skill. Just sheer dumb luck and a fortunate throw of the mace. Pike and Vina argue about how this isn't real when the warrior gets up again. They both attack him this time with anything they can find. Through some form of tomfoolery, they kill the warrior. They then are back in the cage together. They notice the Telosians watching them, but then they leave. Pike and Vina talk about who she is, real or imaginary. Are the Telosians feeling with him as well, like some sort of movie or show? The landing party tries to blast through the metal door with a heavier cannon they brought down with them, but it doesn't really work. It should have, though. The doctor explains that maybe it was. The Telosians simply have the ability to project whatever they want them to see. Back in the cage, Pike and Vina talk about the Telosians. They can't actually make you do anything, but they can trick you with their illusions, and they can punish you if you misbehave. Long ago, they lived on the surface, but went underground after a war thousands of centuries ago. Instead of doing anything about their planet, they began developing their mental powers. But it's kind of a narcotic, addictive. When you can see whatever you want to see, if dreams become more important than reality, you give up everything else that makes life important. She admits she's real, and they're going to be like Adam and Eve. Oh my. She's interrupted and punished by the Telosians. We don't really know what's happening, but we can see that she's in pain, and then she disappears. Pike notices a Telosian, but he turns and leaves. Pike continues to find a way out of the cage when a small door opens up and gives him something to drink. Pike tries to grab the door before it closes, but is unable to do so. A Telosian explains it's a nourishing protein complex. If he doesn't eat it, he'll be punished. And Pike begins feeling the same pain that Vina must have felt. Pike gives in and drinks it. He tries to attack the Telosian, but can't get through the cage. It does startle the Telosian, which amuses Pike. Telosians do have limits. The Telosian ignores Pike's taunting and explains Vina's situation. She is real, and was the only crash survivor. The Telosian studied her and found the species interesting. Pike then gets protective of Vina and the Telosian is pleased by that before leaving. Another illusion shows up. Picnic lunch after a horseback ride. Vina is his wife. Pike talks about how he was telling the doctor this very thing not just a day ago. Pike enjoys himself a tiny bit talking with Vina, but eventually they argue, just like a husband and wife. I love you, Amber. The Telosians continue to watch them interact. They slowly realize they might be wrong, so they change the environment. Now Vina is a green Orion slave girl, dancing for his pleasure. Let loose, Pike. No need to be so formal. Pike freaks out and leaves the room. Clearly, he doesn't like being toyed with. Orion Vina shows up with a torch as Pike looks into a small tunnel. The Enterprise crew forms another landing party to try and beam back down. Only Number 1 and the Yeoman are allowed to. Seems the Telosians blocked everyone else. Number 1 and the Yeoman are in the same cage as Pike and Vina. Vina is still trying to be Pike's mate, but the Telosians are offering him the other ones as options. Number 1 realizes that there was a Vina on the original crew manifest as an adult crewman. That implies she's at least middle-aged at this point and not an 18-year-old woman. A Telosian enters and explains the same things. Pike starts hating on the Telosian since negative emotions are hard to read through, but the Telosian gives him the phantom pain again. The Telosian says, work with us or feel pain. Your choice. Spock, as the acting captain, decides they must leave in order to preserve the crew still in orbit, but the controls have gone dead. Well, shit. In the cage, Pike waits for the opening of the little food door. He surprises a Telosian and drags him out and strangles him. Hold still or I'll break your neck. The Telosian switches to an ape creature and tries to fool Pike, but he's not having it. Switch back or I'll break your neck. The Telosian switches back and demands to be let go or they'll destroy the Enterprise. On the Enterprise, they're trying to fix things when the history computer goes off. They deduce that the Telosians are trying to download their history files. In the cage, Pike tries to laser the door again, but it doesn't work. He bets that the laser is working, and the Telosians are just using an imagery to make them believe it's not. He threatens to test that theory on the Telosian's head, and then the hole appears. They escape to the surface and notice the metal door from earlier was blasted away. Pike says he will stay if he lets Number 1 and the Yeoman leave. The Telosian believes this to be a deception, and it is, in a way. Pike is overloading the weapon and it's going to explode. 2 more Telosians come up, and they telepathically share the information with the one already on the surface. They realize that humans often would prefer death over captivity, even if it's pleasant. Their conclusions, being humans, are too violent and dangerous for their needs. They're free to go back to the ship. This dooms the Telosians. Pike suggests some sort of trade, but the Telosians claim that humanity would just destroy itself too. The communicator rings, and they realize they can beam back. Vina is going to stay. The Yeoman beams back on board with Number 1. Pike stays to talk to Vina. They reveal that Vina is actually old and damaged from the crash, and that's why Vina can't go back with Pike. The Telosians restore her beauty and let her have an illusion of Pike to take back down into the caves. Not sure how I'd feel about that. Pike beams back on board and explains about Vina. Back on the bridge, the Yeoman asks Pike who he would have chosen to be Eve. Number 1 tells her to skedaddle. They engage and away they go from Talos. We get an Enterprise flyby and that ends the pilot. The very first ever episode of the franchise known as Star Trek. Thanks for tuning in. If you liked today's story, please drop a like and subscribe so you get updates on new ones. See you next time on Treksplained.